Well, hey, Brandi.
Hi, Jesse, how are you?
I'm tired and I have a nighttime cough and the normal stuff.
Same, isn't it? It's in this economy, we can't afford that.
Yeah, we cannot. And I'm drinking chai, which is your favorite drink because somebody recommended it to me.
I'm also drinking chai.
So, Brandi likes to explain things, as she put it, and I missed a lot of things from 2002 until 2021 when I was in prison. So we decided to have a series and explore what Brandi can explain to me that I missed.
Yeah, I should say, like, just for reference, my pop culture reference for this time is, you said
2002 to 21.
Right, so I was, I think, in middle school until last year. I was not in middle school. In that time, I went through public school and went to college, moved cities, had several different jobs, including, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but higher ed is a point of reference for me because I worked in higher ed as a staff member for a while. So those are going to be references that are coming up. So when you're like, why don't you know about that? It might be because I was 16. Sorry.
That's fair. I think there's a lot in common with someone in prison and someone who's 16. It's just passing them by.
There's a lot happening. You're feeling a lot of kinds of anxiety, some warranted, some not.
Yeah, I tell people prison is like middle school, but with more knives.
Oh, Jesus.
It's bad.
I mean, there are some middle schools that have a lot of knives, but yes.
True. Yeah. It's more like one of those middle schools. It's just that with bigger humans.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So you have a list. What's on your list?
So we have a list. So basically, because I missed essentially the first 2 decades of the 2000s, what do you think of? Because when I left, I had a Hotmail account. That was it. You had a Hotmail account. That was cool. But now everybody has a Gmail account or has some business account. Or you see those random people who have an AOL, a Yahoo, or a Hotmail address. So what does that mean now?
Yeah. So what does that mean now that when somebody has one of those email addresses? I mean, usually it's that. I mean, my name is not a very commonly spelled name. I think there's 3 of us in the US with my name spelling, and one of them got married and doesn't have that spelling anymore. But I was the first one to get to Twitter, X, whatever. I was the first one to get to Twitter and claim that. I was the first one to get to Gmail and claim that. I was the first one to get to Facebook and claim that. And so there's a certain extent of if you have your name and we're alive at a certain time that you're an early adopter.
Okay.
I think sort of it's a similar concept to now people's area codes who haven't gone to prison or have had a phone kind of continuously. People's area codes are reflective of where they lived at a specific moment in time, when they were old enough to get a phone or whatever. And so they're kind of I heard someone say they're kind of like clan names, it's stuff that you carry with you. So my area code on my cell phone is still from my home area that I grew up in. But similarly, I think for somebody still to have an AOL or a Hotmail or a Yahoo often is indicative of that they were either early adopters of email and stuck with it, or that they aren't early adopters and kind of just didn't move on to the next thing. And in its own kind of flip way. We were talking about this a second ago that I worked in college admissions, and I would see, I worked in college admissions from 2014 to 2019. And then, so I would get these filled out sheets or inquiry emails or whatever. And they'd be filled out and they would have Barbara at Yahoo. And I'm this was not filled out by a 17-year-old, not on this planet. Absolutely not. This is their parent, for sure. And so I think that was always interesting as well, as to see that. But also you've got people right now who also have professional email addresses. And that's probably what you're interacting with most with people, rather than with people who are using a Gmail or an AOL or whatever.
Well, it's so surprising to me because it seems to be this thing where your quote unquote average person has a Gmail account. And then people in the professional sphere have, whatever email at their business or their whatever. And then I'm interacting with these really wealthy people who just use Gmail accounts. And it's so funny to me because it's just, we're all people, but at some point we feel the need to put on this, put on these robes and pretend to be a certain thing. And then after that point, we're no, we're just people.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of like being 16. And then you got to dress up as something else.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also just thinking about I think one of the things that you probably missed was this era of email forwards of if you don't send this on to 16 people, then you're going to be cursed or whatever. Yeah. So there's a time period in history where people would send letters that had to be forwarded or you'd be cursed or whatever. And now, or faxes, I don't know, babies are like you guys. And now like there was a time when it was emails that would be like from your uncle, and it would be like a Far Side cartoon. And then like blah, blah, blah for good luck or bad, like forward to 12 people or whatever, or you'll have bad luck forever. Like some of our uncles still do that stuff. But there was a particular time in the early 2000s that really was like that. And then I think Facebook eventually became that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Did you want to talk about Facebook?
Yeah, so I remember being in prison and hearing or reading an article about like MySpace and Facebook. And I was like, I'm not going to do what the kids would do. Like I would do a MySpace page if I was out there. And I think that's what a lot of people did. But what happened?
I mean, so MySpace was like, for me in my personal life, like MySpace was the thing through high school. And then in like 2006, when I was graduating high school and about to go to college, it was the first time that like Facebook had opened up to high schoolers who had college email addresses.
Okay.
For the first time. And so like my kind of incoming class to college were the first people who could form like Facebook groups for incoming, like, and meet their future classmates that way. And it wasn't just people you knew, but like MySpace in high school really, at least the corner that I was on, was like the emo kids who are like all pictures like with your hair across your face being like, I'm not that. I'm just on a journey and I'm just listening to a lot of Brand New and Fall Out Boy. Which I still am, but I'm not ashamed of that. But it was very moody. It was very like scene kid of like people who listen to a lot of like emo, scream, like all these adjacent kind of genres of music. And like I was saying the other day to you that like people learned basics of coding to be able to like change the backgrounds or whatever. Like the person who was my first college roommate had like a sparkly Playboy bunny logo on the back of her MySpace, which should have been indicative of what that like dynamic was going to be like for us, which is like a little fraught. But Caitlin, you're doing great, honestly. Congratulations on becoming a lawyer in Massachusetts. People would learn these like small things of coding to be able to set up their MySpace page, and so it became in a way like very kitschy teen shit. That it would have like a sad song playing in the back. Tonight will be the night that I will fall for you. like crying, like crying cats or like whatever. It was a very interesting time. Whereas like part of the appeal of Facebook was it was very clean design.
Okay.
It was very pared back. Like you couldn't choose your fonts, you couldn't choose your colors. Like you couldn't have music playing in the background. It was just what it was. And so that felt in that moment, which is also kind of the rise of like Apple and Mac. It felt like this big culture shift from like kind of the excessive age of like the internet being whatever 12 million fonts and like neon colors that you wanted on a background that didn't read well, to like, what if it was like really contained and really packaged down and really clean looking. And so that like Facebook came of age at the same time that you have like soon after like the iPhone is coming in. That was kind of like a whole aesthetic shift that was happening.
Very true.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. When I got locked up, there was no Facebook, there was no MySpace, as best I know, there was no YouTube, there was no Instagram. And you had to meet people in person. The idea of being able to know who was going to be in your college class was not something that was possible. Like I never went to college outside, and then the idea of like a cell phone. I remember the first time somebody got caught with a cell phone in prison, and the only reason you would have it is to set up drug deals. Yeah. Because there was no point in doing it otherwise. Although phone calls were like $7.90 for 15 minutes, so I guess it made more sense if you just wanted to talk.
I'm sure they're very affordable now,
though. Much more so. But cell phones are also much more affordable because they're prolific. But then when the iPhone came out, all of a sudden everybody wants a phone in prison, not just to set up drug deals, but because they're like, oh my God, I can like look at porn, or I can just talk to my family, or I can read all these things. It was just a shift in.
You can see like pictures of my niece's quinceanera. Like,
exactly.
You know, like I can't be there, but I can feel like I'm there.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's so interesting. But also like you thinking about like the little phones that use like a little Nokia brick would be much easier to hide than an iPhone. Like certainly phones have gotten bigger now, but even an iPhone then was much like significantly bigger. Yeah. Or even like razors are back, you guys. I don't know what to do.
Are they really?
Emotionally, yeah. Like they're back. This came up in trivia at Common House last week that like Motorola, I think is making. Anyway, They're back. Because this whole period of culture is coming back. Like this millennial era, like not millennial, but like the new millennium era culture is coming back for the youths who I love. But I'm also like, I already got fully shamed out of wearing those pants. And that stayed with me, and I'm not ready to go back right now. But Godspeed, kids. Like, I wish you luck. Yeah, but like thinking about the iPhone, like I remember when a kid at my college got an iPhone for the first time, and I was like, that's kind of a lot. And now like pretty much everybody has an iPhone, and there's this like really pared down vision of like what phones people can have that seem to matter.
Yeah.
Or like, there was a song that came out from Lady Gaga and Beyonce. Called Video Phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like part of a series that was like almost like Kubrick-esque, but like, or sorry, not Kubrick, like Tarantino.
Okay.
But like it was the brief moment where the idea of a video phone was a thing. Like a phone that you could take video on that wasn't obvious that all phones had video.
Okay.
Like that was a pretty quick transition that happened.
Well, and you mentioned Lady Gaga. So I remember watching a New Year's Eve show because there were a couple things that were really big in prison.
Mm-hmm.
New Year's Eve shows because you get all this different music acts and you just flip from channel to channel to channel. Okay. And it was like a cultural thing.
Yeah. You're getting it all really condensed into one night that you can be like, wait, I'm going to catch all the trends.
Well, and especially because like a lot of the prisons are built in places where you can't get radio stations. Mm-hmm. So you don't know what's being played on the radio. You don't know what's coming out. So those are like cultural moments where you get to like, these are the top 10 bands or singers or whatever in these 3 different fields. So I remember she came out and she did Poker Face. And I was just like, I don't get this. Like, it just is weird. It looks like 80s. Like, okay, not really my thing.
Yeah.
And then I remember the meat suit, and I remember she went on Saturday Night Live, and she, I think it was called Teeth. She played piano and sung Teeth. And I just remember like almost crying, being like, that is the most, oh my God.
Yeah.
And that was when I realized she wasn't just a crazy person. She is a genius.
Well, and I think like that was a similar, like, this is an interesting moment right now because like Britney Spears has come out with her memoir, right? Wow. I don't know if you've heard about this at all. Okay, so Britney Spears has come out with her memoir. There's a lot of tea spilled, including about Justin Timberlake. Yes. I will let you search that out on your own. Enjoy, and we can come back and talk about it later. But like this era of like these young women artists coming out and doing these really big, bold statements that not everybody got in the broader pop culture. Like a lot of what Lady Gaga was doing was responding to the art scene of New York at that time.
Okay.
Like the meat suit was a form of performance art.
Okay.
Very purposefully. It was commentary. And like a lot of the stuff that she was doing was meant to be like not just in conversation with pop culture of the time. And people were reading the pop culture and being like, my rural parents were like, literally, what is this? But it was meant to be in conversation with like the New York city that she came up in. And so in that context, it kind of made more sense. But most people in America didn't have that context. And they were like, what's happening? Like, and I think like Kesha and Lady Gaga both were kind of in that vein of coming out and looking like party girls who were just doing insane shit. And then like the deeper they get into their careers, they were like coming open about some of their different like traumas and different kinds of stuff like that. And also like making artwork that feels like pretty and raw, and people are like, oh, I get this. And then they reflect back on the other kind of artwork in a different kind of a way.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I didn't get it at first. Then I went to being blown away. And then I went to where, I enjoyed some of her stuff, some of it I didn't. Yeah. Some of it was like, I remember we briefly had a music video channel. It wasn't MTV, but it was something like that. And I watched the Bad Romance video. It was VH1, that's what it was. And I remember just being like, I don't know what this is and I don't understand it, but like, this is amazing. This is like, and so I sent it to, there's this kind of adopted mother who like wrote me a letter every week for 16 years. And I was like, you need to look this up. Like, look up Lady Gaga Bad Romance. And she's 70 some years old. Yeah, she writes me back and she's like, I don't know what this is, but it's effing amazing. Yeah. I was like, yes, right? Like it's.
Yeah. Particularly that music video, I think it played a lot with like, not like Photoshop, but they kind of like reshaped her body in that. And it was like, there was commentary on like body dysmorphia in that one, if I'm remembering. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, all that is a whole thing. I think like that's common in our culture is that like women who come out swinging with a big point of view are often seen as like, what is this monster? And then like they slowly kind of get reformed, and then like almost like the idea of like, what are people watching Lady Gaga now is like her like residency in Vegas and like her interacting with like Tony Bennett, which like all that stuff is legit, but also like the softening of like of these artists now as like being palatable and no longer being dangerous and no longer doing kind of big scary commentary is also like very interesting to me.
It is. It is. I mean, is it like cultural taming, or is it like, hey, I've made my statement, like I can be who I want to be now? Like that wasn't me. That was just me making a statement that needed to be made.
I think you both, right? Like the artist can make changes to what they're doing, but also like the way that they're perceived might change out over time.
Makes sense. All right. So there were two phenomena that I didn't understand, and I didn't even hear about one of them, but they were cat videos and Old Man Greg.
Okay. Let me start with cat videos. Have you ever had a cat?
Yes.
Okay. How do you feel about your daily interaction with your cat?
Well, the cat didn't give a crap about me. Like I enjoyed the time that I had when I was deemed important enough to be like brushed by. But
sure. Yeah, I think cat videos were just like a moment on. There are a lot of people who've done much better commentary on this, and so it's like worth a Google. I also want to like backtrack for a second and just say, like you mentioned VH1. Mm-hmm. I think VH1 had a series at one point called like I Love the 70s, and then they did like I Love the 80s.
Yeah.
That actually like, runs through all this pop culture, and they have at some point done like I Love the 2000s. So like it might be worth a watch just to see. I don't know what's in I Love the 2000s. It may or may not be worth a watch, but I was also thinking about pop-up video. Did you ever see pop-up video?
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, and as somebody who loves facts, like pop-up video, RIP, like let's bring it back, please, for the love of God. I loved watching music video channels because like this is weird art, and you've also got music, and you also got like little interviews in between. I love that shit so much.
Well, I remember thinking it was cool because in prison there's this lack of information and connection. So we often didn't have radio stations. You know, I'm reading reference books from the 1980s because that's all that's available.
Sure.
So pop-up video is like, ooh, I get to learn this stuff that ultimately has no value in my life, but feels relevant to the world.
And how nice must it be to have things that have no relevance, that can just be frivolous?
Very true.
Like how many frivolous things do people get in prison? Like probably not enough.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Even things that would seem frivolous in the outside world become valuable and commodified in ways. Like ramen is like the most frivolous thing on the outside.
Not in there.
No. Yeah. So anyway, cat videos. I'm sorry to interrupt. So the whole concept of cat videos, I think, is just like whatever was happening in the zeitgeist at that moment. It was like the pure thing of like nothing is purer than the hilariousness and duplicity of cats.
Okay.
Like in combination. And so it also just, I think cat videos in some ways were like the real first internet meme.
Okay.
Of like, is it that people love cats specifically, or is it just that we found this silly thing to like duplicate over and over again in different kinds of ways? Like, but it like cat videos were everywhere, just like cats falling off things and cats sounding like they're yowling people's names and.
Well, so I still see that on TikTok sometimes. Like I'm not on cat talk, but I'll go through and for whatever reason I'll get like a burst of like cats falling off stuff or trying to jump and not making it. And it's cute. I'm like, oh, this is great. But that was a whole, like, it seemed like that was the entire internet for a couple of years.
Yeah. So when there's not that much else on the internet except for like versions of the Encyclopedia Britannica or like people's genealogy pages or like people's MySpace pages that are sparkling and playing sad songs, to have, I think those videos.
Makes sense.
You know. I think I don't know that I have like a really good explanation for it. Neither do I have a good explanation for Old Greg. But I had a friend in middle high school. We're still friends now. Love you, Emma. Who introduced me to the concept of Old Greg, and I was like, literally, I don't know what's happening. So let me explain it to you in a way that will not inform you more, but will bring you along on the journey.
Okay.
Old Greg was like a comedy sketch video by, I believe, a British group. And basically the concept was like this merman.
Okay.
Has come out of nowhere and is trying to seduce you in the weirdest possible way. Very aggressively. In the meantime, stuff happens. I don't know what it is. Now, that man, Noel Fielding, is a host on Great British Bake Off. Same guy. Do I know what happened in between? No, I don't. I have no idea. I guess he was like in a sketch comedy group. He basically looks haunted and like jokes about being a ghost or a vampire on there on a regular basis, wears excellent sweaters and is very pale.
Okay.
Yeah.
From merman to vampire to British Bake Off.
Yeah, I feel like we should be watching Old Greg.
We should. I didn't prepare that, so we'll have to do that next time.
Yeah.
I don't know that I want to, though, because people have explained the idea of it, and I don't know that I want to see that.
It's absurdist. Like, yeah, but like the line that my friend Emma really taught me, what she referenced, and I was like, I don't know what you're saying, girl. Like, was, have you ever drank Bailey's out of a shoe?
Yeah, people said that to me.
No, I haven't drank Bailey's out of a shoe. It's going really well. Yeah, no, but that was like the line that was referenced. And I think like that was part of the attempted seduction by this like very deranged merman.
Maybe it works.
Slash bog spirit, like, what else do you got?
Let's see. So we have two major political elections that we saw, obviously. Like, I watched the stuff on TV. I was part of kind of the internal zeitgeist. But like, what did it mean on the outside for Obama to be elected?
Okay, so we're talking about Obama. We're going to talk about Trump. Mm-hmm. Great, you're putting me on video. Thanks for that. I really appreciate it. Well, I think that actually, like, I have an interesting perspective on both of these. Okay. So, like, I grew up in a fairly rural space, and like, I was the first one in my family to go to college, and I actually transferred schools. I started at a public university in Virginia, and then I transferred to Oberlin College in Ohio. Where
you like became a communist and like swore your soul to Satan?
As far as the number of people are concerned, yeah. But I was like a little rural kid who was like at one of the most liberal colleges in the U.S. being like, you guys, it all meets back on the other side where everybody just wants to compost. Like, there's actually a lot of things we got in common, but it was a real culture shock. But I was there when Obama was elected. Oh, wow. And like when Virginia was called for Obama, I was in the shower because I'd been like at this watch party in my dorm, and I was just like, guys, I'm tired. I like need to take a shower to like reset my life. I just like, need a moment of silence. And I heard, like, usually in the showers at Oberlin, they're all gender bathrooms. And what does that mean? It mostly means that people sing Disney songs with 3-part harmony. Because it's also a music school. There's a lot of stuff going on there. It's like, no, it's never as nefarious as people expect it to be. It's mostly like part of your world in 3-part harmony. In the showers, like everybody taking a stall. But I'm in the shower and you're in a dorm bathroom. They probably a lot like prison bathrooms. There's a lot of echo in there. There's a lot of bounce to the sound. And so I just hear like the screen go up for like Virginia going for Obama. I get out of the shower and I'm like, what happened, you guys? So I'm at Oberlin, which for anybody who doesn't know the history, Oberlin was founded in 1833, and from its start was coeducational and integrated. Oh, so it was the first college to have an admissions policy to admit students regardless of race. And it had women being educated alongside men from 1833, but they actually were like allowed to get degrees starting in like I think the 1840s. So like one of the earliest places to really be allowing a lot of students in like an institutional policy kind of way. And so that is part of the history and part of why people choose to go there and part of why it has this like really progressive history. And so when like it was announced that Obama had won the election, like everybody just like rushed out of the residence halls and like gathered on the different like squares and like gathered on the central space of Tappan Square. That's like where the college meets the downtown area, which is it's like an 8,000 person town. And people like were holding hands and like running out and coming in there like it was elementary school, and you're like you're just like coming in really tight and then coming out, and everybody's crying and singing. And like Oberlin also has like the largest per capita student dining cooperative system in the US. Okay. So basically it means like students like they plan all the meals, they buy all the food, they do all the kitchen prep, they do all the cleanup and health inspection, but it also means that they have access to really big spoons and really big metal. So people are running out and they're like banging things, and like people are shooting off fireworks, and like one of the Justin Amica, who's this fantastic professor and an Oberlin alum, who's a professor of theater, like got up on the bandstand and like gave this beautiful speech, and like all of these people just remember like crying and being there and feeling like the world had changed in this amazing way, and that like particularly a really politically liberal, leftist in many ways institution, like this really meant something for what the future of policy could be in a space where we were going to really be thinking about things in a smart way. So that was really like a big moment. And I know like some of my friends from Oberlin who like worked on the campaign at various levels who like really were very, very, very involved. And so this was a really big moment that happened there. And it just felt like open changes, like the guide word, but like this feeling of like, oh, we can change the world. Like things can be hopeful. So now let's talk about the other side.
Okay.
Right. So it's 2015. I'm living in Baltimore, which is like not where rural parents from Virginia want their child to live, in case you're wondering. They were very concerned because they heard about Baltimore in the 80s and what was going on in Baltimore in the 80s, which was not great. And just for the record, there is a bumper sticker, which I will never put on my car, but it says how I feel about Baltimore and when I'm outside of Baltimore explaining things. Baltimore, actually, I like it. Like, yes. So I'm in Baltimore and I'm seeing all these people around me who are like, this is crazy. Like, how is this happening? Like, this isn't a real thing. Like, Trump's never gonna elect it. Blah, blah. But I like have family and friends and I'm on Facebook and I'm seeing what people are posting and not posting. And like, I grew up in this space with people who I like loved and love, who explicitly were like, I don't get this. I don't understand this. Like politics is totally borked. Like, we just need to do something totally different. And the whole time I was sitting there being like, but a guy with fake hair and lifts and bad suits from New York City. Did you ever see the Pace commercial?
Yeah.
That's still a big cultural reference for me. It's like, New York City. This sauce is from New York City. Like, that was how I interpreted it.
Yeah.
I didn't go to New York City until after I graduated from college, which is like a cardinal sin in Oberlin. Like, people were really sure I hadn't been to the city. I didn't go until after I graduated, and then that is a whole other story. I got stuck on a train in Grand Central Station in a true comedy of errors of like a real city, like a country mouse scenario where I got like real messed up. But anyway, how did I get to New York City?
You're talking about Trump in New York City.
Trump. The idea that like you have somebody who like is so clearly fake, who's not treating laborers well who work for him, who is wearing fake suits, who's all about money, who's a real estate developer. A real estate developer is like the worst thing you could be to a lot of like rural people where I'm from, where they just like are turning farms and orchards into subdivisions. Like, this is just the worst thing. And they're like, yeah, I think I'm kind of interested in this guy. And I was like, something has happened that I don't understand, but it is happening.
Okay.
So like on election night, a bunch of my friends went to watch parties in other locations. And this was also a point in my life where like everybody was a little bit out from graduation, and a bunch of my friends had started to move other places. One of my friends had moved to the Netherlands. Another friend was living in Sweden for her like postdoc. One of my friends had just moved to California. Another friend was about to move to Denver. And so I feel like all these friends from like Baltimore and DC that I had like loved and been around right after college were all starting to scatter to the winds. And like community was breaking up. And I was also watching this election happen and seeing this guy get elected. And like all of my liberal friends were like, this isn't going to happen. And all my conservative friends are like, yeah, it is. And so I wound up watching the election returns like in my house by myself.
Okay.
And when it happened, I was not completely shocked that Trump was elected, but I was like, ooh, this feels really hard, because I've always had the intention to move back to my rural area. And I was like, there is something that's happened here that I cannot understand. And this is going to make it much harder for me to understand how to connect with people. Because there has been this break that I can't kind of come back to. And I think a lot of other people had a different kind of experience at that moment, but I was like, oh, my community is always going to be scattered. And it's never going to all be in one place. And I need to figure out what to do about that and how to make peace with that. And also the recognition that something has happened where someone has been elected who just does not follow any rules that I can understand, including and especially like growing up in like a fairly big C, small c conservative space. Like, there are rules, and then this is a person who doesn't follow any of those rules, and I don't understand what's happening at all, and we're just gonna have to all figure it out. And I watched a lot of people who like had been kind of like internet activists around me pull back from posting online. I pulled back from posting online because it felt like everybody poured their hearts out about this and like really struggled to figure out how to connect with people with different political perspectives, and then not been able to do it. And I think everybody just kind of like pulled inward. And then I've seen the kind of continuation of that with COVID and people kind of like struggling with how to form community and how to form connection, and how to maintain that connection over time when we're all overtaxed and like, if not sick, like psychologically really struggling, because like the setup of our society right now is not serving kind of our basic needs of connection and care.
That is the most profound thing I've heard about the Trump election. I really like that. So it was different.
It was a bad time. It's a bad time.
Because inside, so when Obama was elected, you obviously have a lot more people of color who are disproportionately represented in prisons. Sure. And one of the things that has always frustrated me is when people don't understand, like when everybody was angry when they made the Little Mermaid black, they're like, why would you do that? And I cannot tell you the experience of talking to so many people who are like, growing up, I've never known a business owner or a president or a superhero and anybody who looked like me. Like, how the F am I supposed to believe that's possible?
Yeah.
That's why, like, I mean, I didn't think Black Panther was the greatest movie, but I thought symbolically and culturally, it was amazing. Yeah. It was so important.
Yes.
There's also what is his name? I'm never going to, Jason Reynolds. I saw him speak in Northern Virginia. Mm-hmm. Amazing. He does children's lit books and animated books with Black characters that are amazing. And are like, he gave probably the best talk I've ever seen. And I didn't expect it, because he walked up there and he does this really good act of like, hey, I'm just a guy and I don't really have anything to say. And then in the end, I'm just like streaming tears. I'm like, that was amazing.
That's how they get you.
But then Trump was the opposite, because I saw Trump bring out all these different divisions. Like, I actually saw a large number of Black people who supported Trump because they were like, yeah, I'm tired of these Democrats. They keep not bringing back parole. They keep like, they're full of shit. I don't believe that. Maybe this guy will be real. And even a bunch of my friends who were kind of disruptors were like, hey, we need this guy elected so he can just mess everything up and we can start over.
Yeah.
And we accomplished part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, part of what made me realize what was coming a little bit with Trump was seeing like not my family, let's be clear, but like parts, people that I knew who were mostly like family and extended relatives who were really, really angry about Obama's election, and like explicitly like, I don't like him because he's Black. Like, there was like, I did not grow up in a space of like subtle racism. There were parts that were incredibly explicit. Like, my county that I grew up in at the time was 98% white. And so like, I just didn't have a lot of experience of other people's perspectives, because they weren't in my spaces. They weren't putting those books in my schools, to my knowledge. Like, I just didn't have that kind of access. And I think the internet, of course, like expands a lot of that in some ways, but also like the internet has become suburbanized in its own way, that you have these like spaces that are just kind of like their own echo chambers. And so I knew that there were a lot of people who were really explicitly angry about Obama being a Black man being elected, and like having the gall to be educated and whatever else, and like getting picked apart. And I think what a conversation that I had with a family member recently, who's like incredibly smart and like very, very practical. I just think of this person as like kind of a Ron Swanson Parks and Rec type, like very like just get it, like just address the thing. I was like, if your plumber wasn't working out for you, would you call a party clown? Or would you find a better plumber? Like, and that person was like, oh, I never really thought about it that way. And I was like, but why didn't you? Like, what happened that you went like, I'm gonna get a party clown to fix this complicated plumbing situation? Which also, like, the context of us, like, plumbing is very complicated in the world of like fixing, like, it's not electricity. Like, this person is like, but plumbing, that's really the problem. And it's like, I'm not going to find a new contractor. I'm just going to go completely like into a totally different thing. I was like, this doesn't make sense. And now, like, years later, that person can be like, oh, interesting, that makes sense. But at the time, like, the fervor that everybody was in, I think was a really different thing. I don't know. I still haven't made total sense of it.
It's so interesting, because actually one of the books that I'm reading that's been taking me forever is called Collective Illusions. It's about why people go along with kind of groupthink, and they go along with what other people do, and how we're swept away by unconscious forces and social forces.
Would you say that you're not getting swept away with that book too much? It's not pulling you along, it's breaking down the...
No, I actually really like it. I really enjoy it. My life is so busy, and I got so many different kind of like assignments for the internship and so many different things I'm doing. But it makes me think about that, because it's one of the things I've tried to be really aware of, because I was in an environment where I had to very consciously deviate from the norm in that environment. I was like, I cannot let this place shape me where I am not going to be able to like live with myself. So I had to be conscious of, oh, this is what's expected of me. This is the reality. Like, where do I find the space? Because there were some things that like I had to do that I didn't necessarily want to do, but they were not negotiable. But there were the vast majority of things where it's like, no, like you can feel that way. I don't have to do that. I don't have to take this step. I don't have to take this action or have this perspective. And that was really important for me to see. And then I think about how few people in the world have had the opportunity, because kind of you said, we're all like suburbanized or homogenized in a space where nobody listens to an outside opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So of course you don't have to think about it. You can just do what everybody does.
So just like for my interest, so like I have a little bit of background in like working with like young adults of like 16 through early 20s, and like thinking about the brain development and development in general of folks of that age. Like, what is the usual age bracket of people who you were in prison with?
I would say majority young. I mean, I went at 18. A lot of people went at 18. There were some people who had been in starting at the age of 18 on.
Mm-hmm.
You had a small proportion, maybe like 5 or 10% who went in their 30s or 40s for the first time, which was very uncommon, but it happened. But the fastest growing group of incarcerated people in America is over the age of 55. It is incredibly disturbing.
That's super interesting.
And there are a lot of different explanations for this, but one is like the breakdown of opportunity and an inability for a generation to adapt with new technology and new realities.
Yeah.
And like your factory job is gone and it's not coming back. So what are you going to do? And people get depressed or they get injured and they get hooked on opiates and they end up going, down this path. And it leads to financial crimes. It leads to a lot of destructive things. It leads to drug addiction and things that come out of that. And it leads to abusive situations where people feel so powerless that they exert power over somebody else because that's the only situation in which they can have it. But yeah, the majority comes from poverty. It comes from a lack of opportunity, a lack of education.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't the entirety. And that's the hard thing is that prison isn't a monolith as much as we want it to be. We're going to be like, oh, if we just give somebody a job, well, yeah, that's going to work for a lot of these people. Like 70% of people, that is going to fix the problem because they just want to be able to pay the bills and have a family. But this other 30%, they actually need something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. The reason that I was asking the question is I was thinking about like the brain development of the thing that I would always talk about when I was working at a college or working with like high school students or college students is that like by 16, most young people have had like all of the logical centers of their brains develop, but the part that like takes until around you're 25 approximately, it's not like I turned 25 and we're cooked, we're fixed, is the part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, that like allows you to essentially like resist peer pressure, to make decisions without the like specter of like what other people will think of you and like kind of the extreme social anxiety that comes with that. And we've talked about the fact that I've come from a rural community, and one of the things that I'm like trying to learn more about is like the idea of enmeshment, the idea of like people being so tight in a community and having such strong needs that like people kind of get assigned to roles, and then that kind of calcifies, and then people don't know how to live a different version of a life, and the people around them don't know how to allow them to. And I wonder if some of what's happening in a prison environment is you get young people in there, and then they might develop more of that, but they're stuck in these patterns.
Yeah.
And like where other people won't allow them to move or change or develop to an extent without like getting these kind of social punishments. But I'm really interested to hear about how the culture within prisons might be shifting as you have some older people come in, or like what it looks like when people who are in their 30s who come in, who like have lived some extent of life and then come in a different kind of a shape.
It's interesting. So for me, relationships are the defining characteristic for change, both for myself while I was inside and since I've been out. It's the reason we're developing the mentor network, because we realized those relationships are vital. And what we saw was that when I go to the juvenile center, when I talk to the kids in a group, I always get one response. When I talk to the kids one-on-one, I actually get a very different response. And that book, Collective Illusions, talks about this. It was in this rural city where nobody believed in drinking or smoking or playing cards, but the vast majority of people drank and smoked and played cards, but they believed that everybody else would judge them, so they stayed doing the thing.
Yeah.
So when I'm in there, the vast majority of these kids are like, I don't want to do this shit anymore. Yeah. Like, I just want to get out and like get a job. Like, I'm tired of doing this. But they believe their peers are going to judge them for saying that. So they don't say it in a group, they say it alone, and they're kind of imprisoned by this. But I'll tell you what was interesting is there were always the old heads inside who would kind of school the younger guys. And they were the best thing in the world. And every now and then you had one who was like predatory, exploitative, but that was actually the minority. The majority of guys were like, hey, I've been where you're at. Like, when you're ready to wake up, come see me. And then would school them and make them get an education and train them or help them in some meaningful way. What was interesting was when the new generation came in, we had really two sets of generations. One was more just socially liberal. Because like when I went in prison was incredibly homophobic. And then you have these kids who are coming in like, I don't care if you're gay, I don't care if you're trans. Like, what's wrong with you, old man? Like, get over yourself. But the other part was
shut up, old man.
kind of what they call like the COVID kids. And we actually saw this even a little before COVID. It was this generation of kids that just do not give a shit. Like they don't care about the hierarchy, the structure, the respect. Like there's just this complete lack of connection. And it's incredibly scary because it used to be like the young kid would come in, he would act up. Sometimes he'd get beat up, sometimes he'd just get talked to, but he would be like, oh, cool, I don't have to be this person.
Mm-hmm.
You have some of these young kids who come in and just do not care and like are violent and controlling and predatory. And it's really problematic because how do you address that? Because what's happened is the fundamental social bonds have been broken in a way that we don't know how to heal. And I don't know what to do with that generation.
And when you say like the COVID generation, you're talking about like young people who came through their like late teen years during this like shutdown and isolation period.
And I don't know exactly where it was because we're seeing it now more in the juvenile center and more in jail and prisons. So maybe it was like 12 to 16 or 18 or something. You're not going to school. You're not being around your friends, especially if you're living in an abusive or neglectful home. You don't have your needs met. You're in a world where it's like, I remember one guy described, he was like, man, I felt like I could do anything. If it was a post-apocalyptic world, I can just go out and do whatever I want. And that mindset when you're young and that actually becomes your norm is incredibly scary.
Yeah, that's really interesting because like I was doing a lot of work during the time of COVID around the idea of like public schools and like what the mental health needs were of like students in public schools and kids in public schools. And a lot of the conversation was like this fear about learning loss and like general talk about like the mental health concerns. But it was really thinking implicitly about like wealthier kids who had opportunity and what this was going to mean for their college access. And it wasn't about like what is going to happen to these students who are in situations where they're really at risk, whether for like poverty reasons and access reasons or about like mental health, that this is going to be genuinely dangerous for them and other people. I was really learning about kind of this other side of it of like, but what if they don't retain their math? Like, which parts of that are more or less valid. Like there's a lot of panic about public schools, particularly in this moment. And one of the things that I found was really interesting from a college access perspective was the idea of like, I mean, if you or anybody else has listened to the podcast Nice White Parents, it's super interesting. Some really great cringe moments, but it's basically about the idea of like parents, it's framed around like public education versus like charter schools and like what a good public education looks like for wealthy families who want to get that access. And like there's a bunch of research that essentially shows that like for wealthy resourced folks, putting their kids into charter schools or into prep schools doesn't necessarily benefit those students very much. They don't like, they're going to get a lot of cultural context and support and learning whether they're in that school or not. But having well-resourced students in public schools helps all of the other students have access to that.
That makes a lot of sense.
And so pulling those students out and putting them in the charter schools, like there's always this panic about like, well, what about my kids? Which like is part of, again, this idea of like community or like seeing the community as just the nuclear family rather than as this broader community. And some of that is natural that you want to take care of your kids, but you want the best thing for your kid. And even if it's that little edge, you'll sacrifice this greater community of students and the community at large for what that could mean. And I saw that like living in Baltimore, that the public schools have a chartered school system where like there's school choice that you can try to get into these different schools, but ultimately like in Baltimore City, if you have any money at all, you generally pull your kids out of public schools and put them into private schools, which means that for a lot of reasons, the public schools are under-resourced in a bunch of different ways.
I mean, it's the brain drain that we see with immigration, where the people who have the highest earning potential or education or their scores leave, and then the environment that needs them the most is.
And in rural areas in America. Like I'm not living in my rural community right now for any number of reasons that are personal, but are also structural. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have to wrap up because somebody else has this room reserved.
I'm sorry.
But no, this is amazing.
It's okay. We're gonna go and we're gonna watch VH1's like I Love the 2000s. We're gonna come back with more content. We're gonna talk about more Lady Gaga if at all possible. We're gonna dig into that more. But yeah, thank you for your time, Jesse. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandi.
Of course.